काज़मी से कि वो अपनी ड्यूटी मोहम्मद बीबी की बारगाह में पेश करें। मोहम्मद वाले मोहम्मद सल्लल्लाहु अलैहि वसल्लम।
अल्लाहुम्मा सल्लि अला मुहम्मदिन व आले मुहम्मद।
मैं शाम फता करके आऊंगी, ज़ैनब है मेरा नाम। मैं शाम फता करके आऊंगी, ज़ैनब है मेरा नाम। तुझसे जो किया वादा, तुझसे जो किया वादा, भैया मैं नहीं बचाऊंगी, ज़ैनब है मेरा नाम। शबीर जो सर तू कटवाएगा सजदे में, कटवाएगा सजदे में, सर सिर दाल उठा कर, सर सिर दाल उठा कर, तेरा साथ मैं निभाऊंगी, ज़ैनब है मेरा नाम। पहनाई में दूंगी हाय शाम गरीबा को, हाय शाम गरीबा को, गाजी के बाद गाजी, गाजी के बाद गाजी, हाय बन के मैं दिखाऊंगी, ज़ैनब है मेरा नाम। मैं शाम फता करके आऊंगी, ज़ैनब है मेरा नाम। तुझसे जो किया वादा, तुझसे जो किया वादा, भैया मैं नहीं बचा।
For your own marhumin and for the marhumin of the sponsors of the majlis, as well as those who have helped build this institution, please recite Surah Al-Mubarakat Al-Fatiha. من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين، بارئ الخلائق أجمعين، فاطر السماوات والأرضين، والصلاة والسلام على سيدنا ونبينا وحبيب قلوبنا وطبيب نفوسنا أبي القاسم المصطفى محمد.
صل على محمد وآل محمد.
وعلى أهل بيته الطيبين الطاهرين المعصومين المظلومين الذين أذهب الله عنهم الرجس وطهرهم تطهيرا.
اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد.
ولعنة الدائمة على أعدائهم أجمعين من الآن إلى قيام يوم الدين. رب اشرح لي صدري ويسر لي أمري واحلل عقدة من لساني يفقه قولي. أما بعد، فقد قال الله سبحانه وتعالى في كتابه المبين وهو أصدق الصادقين. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. يا أيها الناس أنتم الفقراء إلى الله والله هو الغني الحميد. صدق الله العلي العظيم. صلوات.
اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد.
Dear brothers and sisters, Salamun Alaikum Jami'an wa Rahmatullahi wa Barakatuh.
Assalam.
Begin by saying, A'lam Allah ujurana wa ujurakum bi musabina bil Hussein alayhi salatu wassalam. May Allah magnify your reward and our reward for our commemoration of the tragedy of Abu Abdullah alayhi salatu wassalam. Once again, it's an honor to be invited to speak here under the banner of Hazrat Abbas alayhi salam. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. I don't have much to offer, but inshallah I'll say some brief words, and whatever we can benefit, then that is through the barakah of Hazrat Abbas alayhi salam. The topic that we had begun yesterday was on the concept of Tawheed, and what we said was فَأَقِمْ وَجْهَكَ لِلدِّينِ حَنِيفًا فِطْرَةَ اللَّهِ الَّتِي فَطَرَ النَّاسَ عَلَيْهَا. That turn your face towards the righteous religion, which is the fitrat of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, which He has made all people on. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala made everyone upon a fitra. He is created, which refers to the way that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has created mankind, so that that belief in God is intrinsic and internal to humanity. When Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, وَنَفَخْتُ فِيهِ مِنْ رُوحِي, He's given Hazrat Adam of His ruh. That means therefore that all of insan, all of nas has something in their primordial nature that connects them to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and that also gives them a sense of morality. Because without God, one asks, where does morality come from? If we believe that as human beings there is haqq, there is batil, there is adalat and there is zulm, there is justice and injustice, there is right and wrong. If we say that these are real concepts that exist, then the question is, where did they come from? Where have they come from then? As Muslims, we believe that they are part of the fitrah to recognize these things, that the fitrat of Allah recognizes these things, and it is attracted to these things. So that was the discussion on fitrah. We said that that is one of the strongest proofs of the connection and the internal ma'rifah of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that each person is born with. Please recite a salawat.
Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad.
And so today I'd like to just continue that topic and give a brief, very brief overview now of Tawheed. And it's a little bit of a philosophical topic. It's not something that is completely, fazail. It's not that. It's more philosophical to connect us to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala from a theological and philosophical lens. But if you'll allow me, this is something that we don't often get a chance to speak about. And so it's important that when we don't have classes, when you don't have seminars, to understand these concepts at a slightly deeper level than we usually do, then allow me to take a few minutes of your time to explain it to you at a little bit of a deeper level. If you can recite a salawat. when we talk about Tawheed, when we say that there is a belief in a divine, one of the very easy ways to understand that from a philosophical perspective is to say that the world is divided, all of existence can be divided into three types. One of those types is those things called the necessary existence, those things that must exist. If something must exist, then we would call it wajib al-wujud. Okay? Wajib al-wujud means that its existence is necessary. Then you have those things that we can say are mumkin al-wujud, which means existence is not necessary for them. There is nothing in those things that indicates they must exist. So for example, all the things you look at around you, these chairs, this barrier, these banners, these lights, they are all mumkin al-wujud, because they don't have to exist. They exist right now, but nothing in them indicates that they must exist. At some point in the past, they did not exist. And at some point in the future, they will not exist. Okay? Now there's a third category which is called mumtani ul-wujud, which is those things that cannot exist. Now for example, that would be like to say that there's something like a square circle. A square circle is a contradiction in terms. You can't have a square circle. So that kind of thing cannot exist. So you have wajib al-wujud, mumkin al-wujud, and mumtani al-wujud. That which its existence is necessary, that which existence is possible, and that which thing its existence is prohibited. It can't exist. Okay, now if we look at the world around us, we see that the world is filled with mumkinat al-wujud, mumkin al-wujud, which is that the world around us is filled with those things that are contingent, those things that do not have to exist. Nothing in themselves dictates they must exist. Therefore, in order to cross from non, they had to get their existence to come into being. They had to get their existence from something else, meaning their existence is mumkin. In order to cross that barrier from non-being into being, there had to be something to push it over the barrier. There had to be something to bring it about. Without that, it could not have existed. Now you might ask yourself, what if we were to go back in time and say that we had an infinite regress of causes? To say that, for example, these things that are mumkin al-wujud that we see in front of us, they came about from things that came about before them, which depend then on things that existed before them, which then depend on things that existed before them, etc., 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 into infinity. Is that a possibility? And the answer to that is no. That we cannot say that if everything we know is mumkin al-wujud, then when you extend that back in time into infinity, it is not possible that we would be here today. If you were to imagine Adam, to imagine nothingness, a domain in which there is no space, a domain in which space is not conceivable, a domain in which there is no life, a domain in which there is no time, then in that domain, you are saying that existence must come from that, which is not conceivable. Rather, because that is not possible, therefore we know that all the mumkinat al-wujud that exist have to go back to something which is wajib al-wujud, whose existence is necessary. That thing that's existence is necessary is none other than Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Please recite a salawat.
Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad wa ajil faraja.
Ya ayyuhan nas antum al-fuqara ila Allah wallahu huwa al-ghaniyyul hamid. O mankind, you are fuqara, you are the ever needy in relation to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and Allah is Ghaniyul Hamid. This is alluding to the same idea, which is that in our relationship to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, we are ultimately nothing. Because we derive, like all mumkin al-wujud, we derive our existence. Our existence depends on the wajib al-wujud. No mumkin al-wujud can come about from itself. To cross from being into being, to go backwards in time is an impossibility. To say that there was absolutely nothing, no laws of physics, no time, no space, and to say that being came into being from that realm is an impossibility. Therefore, there must have been something which depends on nothing, which in and of itself, it is alive. In and of itself, it has existence. In and of itself, it has power. And that is none other than Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's existence is wajib, and He is wajib al-wujud, He cannot depend on anything else for His existence. That wajib al-wujud cannot depend on anything else for its existence. Its existence is independent. Because it cannot depend on anything, therefore we know that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala cannot be limited to a space. Because if we were to say that Allah were confined to a certain place, then He would be dependent on that place. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala cannot be restricted to a time, because if He were restricted to a time, then He would depend on that time. And we said wajib al-wujud cannot depend on anything. Therefore we know that that wajib al-wujud, because its existence is wajib, is also eternal. There is no time at which that wajib al-wujud cannot exist. Please recite a salawat. I'm condensing a dars, a full dars into 5-10 minutes here. So if there are some gaps in understanding, that's okay. I want to give you just a glimpse of some of the ideas. Okay? Just a glimpse of some of the ideas when we talk about Tawheed from a philosophical and theological perspective. That is the Tawheed fi Dhat. When it comes to Tawheed fi Sifat, our understanding of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is that those attributes which we know Him by, such as mercy and justice and love and kindness, those are all exactly, they are part of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's Dhat. For example, we can think of human beings differently. If there's somebody named Ahmad, we could think of him as, let's say, being an angry person. Now, if Ahmad is angry, that is a quality of Ahmad. But we can think of Ahmad also without that quality. That maybe he goes through some therapy, maybe he undergoes anger management, and he is not angry anymore. So Ahmad is no longer described as an angry person. So that quality of anger can be taken away from Ahmad, and it can be given to Ahmad. Whereas the attributes and sifat of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala are not like that. They are not something that comes from the outside, they are the very zat of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Meaning that anger is something that we can separate from Ahmad. But that love and kindness and justice, we cannot separate that from the zat of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. If we were to separate it from the zat, then Allah would depend on something else for that attribute. He cannot depend on anything. Therefore Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is Hayy. He has life in and of Himself. He doesn't depend on anything for life. He has power in and of His Zat. He doesn't depend on anything outside of Him for power. He has knowledge in His Zat. He doesn't depend on anything outside of Himself for knowledge. And we cannot compartmentalize the Zat of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Because when we say love, when we say knowledge, when we say ilm and adalat and hikmah and muhabba and all these qualities of the Zat of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, these are just names that we are using to understand God. We are using to understand Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. These are just titles. But ultimately all of these names and these attributes are going back to the same Zat. Do you understand what I'm saying? That these are titles that we are giving to understand Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That we say it is not that part of Allah is Ar-Ra'uf, part is Rahman, part is Rahim, part is Kareem. That's not the case. That Rahim is the Kareem. That Kareem is the Rahman. That Rahman is the Rahim. All of these terms are just terms going to the same Zat. Those terms are all referring to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. They have made it easy for us to understand Allah. It is not that Allah is consisting of these things, it is how we are understanding Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Because an infinite being cannot be fully understood by a finite being. That Zat Muqaddas which is eternal cannot be fully grasped by a limited human intellect. Please recite a salawat.
Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad.
Please recite one more salawat.
Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad.
Perhaps Imam Sadiq can explain the same concept a little bit better, which is that in Al-Kafi there's a narration in which Imam Sadiq says that the name of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is different from the named thing. The name is different from the named thing. Whoever worships the name and not the meaning has disbelieved in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and has worshipped nothing. Whoever has worshipped in the name, whoever has worshipped the name of Allah and the meaning has committed shirk. He has become a polytheist and he has worshipped two gods. Whereas whoever worships the meaning of the word only, in reality that is the one who has worshipped Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. He says, "Oh Hisham, did you understand what I'm saying?" Hisham says, "Can you explain a little bit more?" Imam says that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has 99 names. If each name had a separate meaning, then each name would have been a God in and of itself. Allah is one only and His names stand for one reality. And all these names are other than Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala Himself. Oh Hisham, bread is the name of something we eat. Water is the name of something we drink. Dress is the name of something we wear, and fire is the name of something that burns. Oh Hisham, now do you understand the meaning? That the names that we are referring to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala by are all different mental constructs that help us reach that reality, that haqiqat, which is the Zat Aqdas of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Please recite a salawat.
Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad.
Very briefly, I'd just like to mention, again in the bahas of Tawheed, one of the concepts that's really important to understand also when we're talking about some of these sifat of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, to have a better understanding of what some of these sifat mean. When we say that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is Rahman and Rahim, what is the difference between those? To say Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is Rahman is to refer to the quantity, the overwhelmingness of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's mercy. قَالَ عَذَابِي أُصِيبُ بِهِ مَنْ أَشَاءُ وَرَحْمَتِي وَسِعَتْ كُلَّ شَيْءٍ. Allah says in the Holy Quran that my punishment reaches whoever I will, but my mercy encompasses all things. My azab reaches certain people at certain times under certain conditions, but my mercy is for all times and all places and all things. According to a narration, Inna lillahi mi'ata rahmatin wa inna allaha innahu anzala minha wahid al-ard faqasamaha bayna khalqi faqasama bayna khalqihi biha yata'atafuna wa yataraqamun wa ukharu tis'u wa tis'ina li nafsihi yarhamu biha ibadahu yawm al-qiyamah. That Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says that His mercy, which is infinite, consists of 100 parts. Of those 100 parts, which by the way, this is a figure of speech, because that infinite mercy cannot be divided into 100 parts. So this is a way that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is trying to allow us to understand His mercy. He says that that mercy consists of 100 parts. Of those 100 parts, one part has been given to the inhabitants of this earth. Through that one part of mercy, they have relationships with one another. They show mercy towards one another. They have kindness towards one another. 99 parts of mercy will be manifested on the Day of Judgment. One of those parts is that mercy which we experience in this life. Please recite a salawat.
Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad.
So Ar-Rahman is that overwhelming abundance of His mercy, whereas Rahim means that that mercy is part of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's essence. It is part of His Zat, which means that it cannot be separated from His essence. When something is part of somebody's essence, then it cannot be separated from that thing. For example, if there is a person who likes to serve the masjid, the Imam Barga, we would say that he is very generous. We would say that he is very generous. Why? Because every time we see that person, he is serving people, he is cleaning up, he is preparing chai, he is preparing tabarruk, he is taking care of whatever needs to be done in the Imam Barga so that it is a comfortable experience. So that generosity has become a part of him. It has become part of his Zat. We don't need to ask, why is he doing that? Whereas with somebody else, we might ask, why is he doing this? But for that person, because that generosity and that karama has become part of him, we don't ask, why is he doing it? Because it's part of his Zat, it's part of his essence. When we say that Rahmah is part of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's essence, what we are saying is that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala does not need a reason to be merciful. That mercy is part of how Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's existence is. There is no need to ask why. We don't ask why. We don't try to understand. Rather, that is the nature and the Zat of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, is to have that Rahmah, which is expressed in the name Rahim. Because it is part of His Zat, it cannot be separated from Him. It has become a part of who He is. And of course, these are terminologies that I'm using which don't fully apply to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, but it's just so you understand. Please recite a salawat. And so there is a lesson in this for us as well, which is to say that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's mercy is the default. As we said, it is part of His Zat to have that rahmah, which means He doesn't need any reason to be merciful. When Allah's anger is manifested, when the wrath of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is manifested, that is under certain conditions. That is in response to certain things. That is limited. But that mercy is for all times and places. So the default is actually mercy. And some urafa would actually say that that intiqam, that wrath, is actually part of mercy as well. That anger of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is also mercy. But the lesson for us is that if this is the default of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, which is to be merciful, then what is the issue with you and I? That we cannot behave in this way as well. That when we interact with other people, why is it that our basis for that interaction is not mercy? Why is it not gentleness? Why is it not kindness? If we know that that is the Zat of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, those are the names of the Zat that we repeat day in and day out to understand Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in our prayers, then why is it that we do not manifest that in our lives? Please recite a salawat.
Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad.
You see, as we said yesterday, according to scholar and Mufassir Allama Tabatabai, all the ma'arif of Islam will connect back to Tawheed. Everything is connecting you back to that muwahhid budan, to be a muwahhid, to be a person who is a muwahhid towards Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. See, everything we do, when we make a niyyah, when we say Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim, it's very easy to teach our children to say that, yes, you should say Bismillah. Before you eat, say Bismillah. Before you drive, say Bismillah. Right? Get in this habit of saying the Bismillah before you do anything. And that's a good practice, and we should teach our kids. But what that really is doing is not just a verbal expression. It is a matter of tawajjuh, right? Of attention. That when you are saying that Bismillah, you are giving your attention towards Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That is ultimately what was wanted. It wasn't just that you should say it in your words, it was to make your action the action of a muwahhid. And so when you begin with that outlook, then that action becomes the action of a muwahhid. That becomes a tawheedi action. Please recite a salawat. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad wa ajil faraja. This bahas of tawheed it's a long discussion. In fact, I read a whole ashra on this one time, 10 lectures. So here I had 2 lectures. And so I'm trying to give you just some of the nuggets from those lectures of 10 in 2. So inshallah you'll forgive me for any shortcomings, but this is a necessary discussion. Okay? So inshallah, just wrapping up a few more points that I'd like to make, which is that ultimately all of what we have had so far is a philosophical and a theological discussion. And I can see that for some of the younger ones, I've already lost their attention. But that is okay. Inshallah, 5 years, 10 years from now, we'll have the same discussion and they will pay attention at that point. But what is the nuqta? Right? What is that ultimate point that we are trying to get to with Tawheed? Because ultimately, this was all a preliminary. Because when the ulama of kalam, when the theologians discuss Tawheed, and when the philosophers discuss Tawheed, they say that the ultimate goal and the ultimate end of Tawheed is Tawheed fil ibadah. It is not a philosophical concept, it is not a theological concept. Rather, it is something more raw and primordial than that, which is to say, La ilaha illallah, there is no ma'bud except Allah. Which is to say that ultimately what Tawheed is trying to get us to realize is that there is no deity worthy of our ibadah other than Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. We are not saying respect. Respect can be for many people. Respect is for mu'mineen. Respect is for our parents. Respect and ihtiram and love at the highest levels are for the Prophet and the Ahlul Bayt. But when it comes to ibadah, which is another level, then that ibadah is directed towards Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And when we try to understand what that ibadah is, we can divide it into maybe 3 different ways. One is to say that we worship something in a formal sense. A person gets on his hands and knees and he prostrates towards something. That is one understanding of ibadah. And I don't think anyone in this room is in danger of doing that to other than Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Right? One is to get on one's hands and knees and to pray towards something, that is ibadah. Another understanding of ibadah is to follow something without any conditions. To say that I accept this person, this qawl, without any prerequisites. That is also ibadah. Okay, that is also ibadah. But according to Imam al-Jawad alayhi salatu wassalam, he gives a very subtle understanding of ibadah, which is that he says that whoever listens to a speaker, he has indeed worshipped that speaker. If the speaker is from God, then he has worshipped God.
If the speaker speaks with the tongue of shaitan, then he has worshipped shaitan. Whoever gives his ear to a speaker has in fact worshipped that speaker. So if that speaker is from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, then by listening to him, he has worshipped Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. If that speaker is from shaitan, then by listening to him, he has worshipped shaitan. So now the Imam is giving you a different understanding of ibadah. He is saying that ibadah is what you are giving your attention to. Ibadah is what you are giving your nafs to. Ibadah is what you are giving your mind to. Ibadah is what you are giving your soul to. That thing that you are giving your attention to, you have worshipped that thing. On one level, your heart has worshipped that thing. And this is where we struggle sometimes, my brothers. Because in today's world, the ability for us to worship other than Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, it's not very hard. To give our tawajjuh to anything and everything except Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is not very hard. You know, there's a story that there was a professor in North Carolina. He said that I moved to North Carolina and I had a 5-year-old daughter and I wanted her to make some friends. This was a few years ago. And he said that I went to our neighbors, they also had a daughter who was the same age. And so I took my daughter to their house and I introduced my daughter to their daughter. And then I said that we would like to have a play date with your family, meaning that we would like to set up a time where my 5-year-old daughter can play with your 5-year-old daughter. And he says that the parents of the other 5-year-old daughter, they pulled out their phone and they said that my daughter's schedule is full right now, but 2.5 weeks from now, she has a 45-minute slot. At that time, you can spend some time with my daughter. Right? 2.5 weeks from now, she has an opening for 45 minutes. And if your daughter would like, at that time, she can spend some time with my daughter. So the point of that is to say that in today's world, there are so many distractions to be a muwahhid. There are so many things that are pulling us in different directions. There are so many things that have occupied our heart. And so to be a muwahhid, to be a person of tawheed, which is ultimately what Hazrat Abbas and the Ahlul to connect us to. Ya ayyuhalladhina amanu ittaqallah wabtaghu ilayhi al-wasila. Take a wasila towards Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That wasila being the Ahlul Bayt. That reality that they are trying to connect us to, which is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. One of the very first things that we have to do, right, on a practical level, to worship only Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, is to negate the worship of other things, is to remove those other things from our heart. Just like in the kalama of Islam, when we say La ilaha illallah, not only are we affirming the existence of Allah, but we are also denying the uluhiyya of other things. We are saying that there is nothing else that is at that maqam. There is nothing else at that level. So first there is a rejection and then there is an affirmation. Yes, thank you. Please recite salawat. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. Again, a muwahhid is a monotheist, a person who truly not just says the kalama, but believes and acts according to the kalama. Who has manifested tawheed in his life. Who has acted in accordance to tawheed. It's not just to say that Allah is one. Allah ek hai. That is our understanding. This is not what we're saying. It is much deeper than that. Right, so this is a whole class. Inshallah, we can discuss this more at length. But the last point that I'll make is that everybody has these mashaghil, everybody has these distractions that are prohibiting him from becoming a muwahhid. If you want to know what your distractions are, then you just have to be silent for some time and pay attention to where your mind goes. Where does your nafs go? When you are laying down at night, when there is no distraction, there's no light, there's no sound, where is that nafs and that mind going to? What is it thinking about? What is it occupied with? See, that will tell you what those attachments are. Those things that your mind is going to, that is where your attachments lie. And so each of us has to slowly work to remove those things. As there's a narration from Imam Baqir alayhi salam, in Al-Kafi, where he says, إِنَّمَا أَرَادُوا الزُّهْدَ فِي الدُّنْيَا لِتَفْرُغَ قُلُوبُهُمْ لِلْآخِرَةِ. That the Ahlul Bayt, they and the awliya of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, they practiced zuhud in this dunya. They were zahid in this dunya, so that their hearts would be empty for the akhirah. لِتَفْرُغَ قُلُوبُهُمْ لِلْآخِرَةِ. The concept that the Imam is mentioning is faraghatul qalb, the emptying of the heart. Not emptying from everything, emptying from those attachments that have occupied that heart from connecting towards Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, from connecting to the Ahlul Bayt. That is what we are after. Please recite a salawat. I've already taken too much of your time, and I apologize to the organizers. And I know that this is a very heavy topic for the night of arbaeen. But if you'll forgive me, that was something that I felt was necessary to share. And inshallah, if we have time in the future, then we can have a longer discussion on this topic. Please recite the salawat. And in munasabat of this occasion that we have all come together to remember this tragedy, this commemoration of the arbaeen of Imam Hussein, just like to take a few minutes to remember those moments when the Ahlul Bayt alayhimus salam were given freedom to leave that zindan of Sham and to journey back to that homeland. Because as we know, the Umayyads, according to some narrations, said to the Ahlul Bayt that you can now remain in Sham. But the Ahlul Bayt said, no, we would like to go because we are muhajirs from the Haram of Rasulullah. That we are the muhajireen of Medina. And we have left that town, and therefore we would like to go back. Sallallahu alayka ya Aba Abdillah, Sallallahu alayka ya ibna Rasulillah, wa ala al-arwah allati hallat bifina'ik, alaykum minni jami'an salamullahi abadan ma baqit. وبقي الليل والنهار ولا جعله الله آخر العهد مني لزيارتكم السلام على الحسين وعلى علي بن الحسين وعلى أولاد الحسين وعلى أصحاب الحسين بأبي أنت وأمي يا أبا عبد الله. On the 20th of Safar, on the 40th, after Imam al-Hussein alayhi salam was killed, Jabir ibn Abdullah al-Ansari comes to visit Karbala with a companion by the name of Atiyah. At this point, Jabir had lost his eyesight. He was an old man, so he tells Atiyah, Ya Atiyah, take me to the river of Furat. Atiyah takes him to the river of Furat. Jabir does a ghusl in this river. He comes out from the river and he wears the best of his clothes and he takes some perfume and perfumes himself. Then he starts taking small steps towards the grave of Abi Abdullah and Hussein. There's a tradition that suggests that when Jabir ibn Abdullah al-Ansari, he asks Atiyah, "Oh Atiyah, take me to the grave of Aba Abdullah." Atiyah says, "Oh Jabir, I don't know which one of these graves is the grave of Aba Abdullah." Back in those days, the graves of the Imam was just sand. He says, "I don't know which one of these graves is the grave of the Imam." Jabir says to him, "Take me to each grave, Ya Atiyah. I will tell you which one is the grave of Aba Abdullah al-Hussein." Atiyah says Jabir started picking up some sand from each of the graves. Jabir starts smelling them until he comes to the grave of Aba Abdullah. Finally, Jafar picks up some sand. He smells that sand. He says, "Ya Atiyah, hada qabrul Hussein." "Oh Atiyah, this is the grave of Aba Abdullah." Atiyah says, "How do you know this, O Jafar?" He says, "Oh Atiyah, I have kissed Hussein. Atiyah, I have smelled Hussein. I know this smell, and this is the smell of Aba Abdullah." Jafar stands over the grave of Aba Abdullah. He throws himself onto the grave of Imam al-Hussein. He cries out, "Ya Hussein, Hussein, I am your beloved Jabir. You are my beloved Hussein. Please respond to Jabir, Ya Aba Abdullah. Ya Aba Abdullah, how can you speak to me when your head was separated from your body?" Then Jabir recites Ziyarat of Abi Abdullah al-Hussein. That is known as the Ziyarat of Jabir ibn Abdullah al-Ansari. When he finishes this Ziyarat, Atiyah says, "Ya Jabir, I am seeing a crowd of people dressed in black. Oh Jabir, this crowd is coming from a distance. Let's go see who it is." The news comes to Jabir, "Oh Jabir, this is your master Zainul Abidin who is coming." Jabir Zainul Abidin has come back with his family. Jabir gets up and runs towards Imam as-Sajjad. Jabir falls down on the feet of Imam Sajjad. He kisses the feet of Imam Sajjad. He says, "Ya Rasulullah, will you tell me what happened in Karbala?" Imam Sajjad starts crying. He says, "Ya Jabir, where will I begin telling you what happened in Karbala? This is the place where our men were killed in front of our eyes. This is the place where our women were taken as prisoners." Then the family comes back to Karbala. When Zainab alayhi salam smells the fragrance of Imam al-Hussein coming from his grave, she throws herself on the grave of Abu Abdullah. She says, "Oh my brother, shall I tell you what happened to me on this journey? Oh Imam al-Hussein, should I show you my body? It has come back black from the beatings of Bani Umayyah. Every time I cried for you, O Hussein, every time I called out for you, they beat me with their whips, they hit me with their sticks." Then the daughter of Hussein throws herself onto the grave of her father. She says, "Ya Abata, O my father, I am your beloved daughter. Father, what a difficult journey it has been." Then Rabab comes. She says, "Ya Sajjad Zain al-Abidin, where is the grave of my son Ali al-Asghar? Where is the grave of al-Asghar?" Sajjad looks at her. He says, "Ya Rabab, when I buried the body of my father Hussein, I heard a voice from his throat. He didn't have a head to talk, so the throat was speaking. The throat said, 'Oh my son Sajjad, keep my baby on my chest.' So I buried my brother Ali al-Asghar on the chest of my father, Ya Rabab. Inna lillahi wa inna ilayhi raji'un. Wa sayalamu alladhina zalamu ayya munqalibin yanqalibun. Sallu ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad.
और मोहम्मद वाले मोहम्मद सल्लल्लाहु अलैहि वसल्लम। I'd like to thank Maulana Shah Abbas for accepting our invitation to the Abbas. I'd also like to apologize to our brothers who are waiting here for the Maulana to arrive and the regular members to arrive. So I apologize to you guys. You were on time. Unfortunately, our community comes on Desi Standard Time and we get late. So complete apologies to you. And I would like to give it back to Maulana, to Ahmed. Muhammad wa ali Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam.
हदिया सलाम के लिए जनाब सैयद फराज हैदर जाफरी साहब बर मोहम्मद आले मोहम्मद सलावत।
अल्लाह की इजाज़त से
बिस्मिल्लाह।
मैं आ गई हूँ नाना कदी बचा के भैया मैं आ गई हूँ नाना कदी बचा के जाऊंगी अब मदीना चेहरों तेरा मना के भैया मैं आ गई हूँ नाना कदी बचा के भैया तुम्हारी ज़ैनब अब वो नहीं रही है पहचान लोगे मुझको हालत बदल गई है चलती है ये ज़ईफ़ा भैया कमर झुका के भैया मैं आ गई हूँ नाना कदी बचा के कैसे बताऊं भैया बाजार में जो गुजरी कहते थे सबके मारो ये है अली की बेटी बाबा के भी मैं बदले सब आई हूँ चुका के भैया मैं आ गई हूँ नाना कदी बचा के मालूम है ये तुमको ज़ैनब उजड़ चुकी है लेकिन तेरी शहादत घर घर पहुँच गई है शाबाश दो बहन को शाबाश दो बहन को भैया गले लगा के भैया मैं आ गई हूँ नाना कदी बचा के ये कह के तकल्लुम उठी अली की बेटी अब्बास की लहद पर पहुँचा दे मुझको कोई दिखला दूँ बाबा को रस्सी के नील जाके भैया मैं आ गई हूँ नाना कदी बचा के मोहम्मद
मोहम्मद वाले
जनाब खास सदर गुजर साहब से कि वो तबियत सलाम के लिए तशरीफ लाए। अजमत मोहम्मद और मोहम्मद पर बुलंदर सलावत।
लहू हुसैन का पहुंचा बहन की चादर से, लहू हुसैन का पहुंचा बहन की चादर से, गरीब ज़हरा